Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Kalam again, and this brief lecture is in week 6, module 6, and we're going to go over compensation again. And in particular, we're going to talk about learning outcomes 3.1 and 3.6 in chapter 13. So for 3.1, we're going to talk about, or we're going to name and define each of the main pay for time not worked benefits. We'll understand a little bit more about what that is. And we'll also talk about another important concept in 3.6, which is how to use benefits to improve engagement, productivity, and that all important concept of performance. So as we begin, let's begin quickly and talk about each of the main pay for time not worked benefits. So what is time not worked? So it's maybe it's unemployment insurance. So we have to consider that all states in the United States have unemployment insurance or compensation acts, and they all follow very clear federal guidelines, and they provide for weekly benefits if a person, for example, is unable to work through some fault other than his or her own. So the benefits derive from an unemployment tax, and employers pay that tax, and it can range from about 1% to 5% of taxable payroll in most states. So an employer's unemployment tax rate reflects its rate of personnel terminations, is one of the metrics that it's measured by. So another form of time not worked pay is vacations and holidays. So and that simply is the number of paid employee vacations or days, and we'll talk about those, how they vary considerably from employer to employer. Firms have to address several holidays and vacations in their policies and procedures, and there are a myriad of laws that affect benefits for vacations, holiday pay, and legal issues associated with them, and we'll discuss those in more detail in this module in week 6. So also there's a thing called sick pay or sick leave. Sometimes employers roll, when I say roll, I mean combine vacations, holidays, sick pays into something called PL, personal leave, and holidays and sick time is taken from those. So sick leave essentially provides pay to employees when they're out of work due to some sort of illness. Most sick leave policies grant full pay for a specified number of permissible sick days. So when we say permissible, there are certain criteria. It's not the type of sickness, although that can come into play, but it's really the notification to the employer about sick. Okay, and there's some policies always include specific time to call, number of days, doctor's notes, and medical verification in some instances. So to minimize employees using their sick leave as extensions of their vacation, some employers repurchase sick leave at the end of a year by buying the employees a daily equivalent sum. So that's essentially a buyback. It's an incentive, really, that offers employees who don't use their sick time a way to buy them back. And sometimes it results in payment, or it might result in addition to paid time off or personal time. So there are different combinations employers become very creative in assigning sick and vacation and holiday pays. Okay, so, and then there's a cost reduction strategy or tactic. Employers use several tactics to reduce excessive leave of absence, for example. Some repurchase unused sick leave, as I mentioned, at the end of the year by paying them a lump sum. And the problem is that legitimately sick employees may come to work, and that causes some other issues. Whereas, with the flu or with other illnesses and then become sick or have injuries, and it causes a number of other problems in the workplace. So many employers use pooled leave plans, as I mentioned before, or leave banks, where they can draw from sick or personal leave, and there's no differentiation in terms of the nomenclature, the type of terminology used. So we talk about some legal definitions here. Leaves and the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, which is a law in this country, and it stipulates one that private employers of 50 or more employees must provide eligible employees up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for their own serious illness. The birth of their child is included, or the care of a seriously ill child, spouse, or parent. So it's an adoption of an act that was created by Congress and the legislature and adopted across all states. So federal. Employers may require employees to take unused sick as part of their 12-week allocation provided in the law. Another part of this is employees taking leave are entitled to receive health benefits while they're on unpaid leave, which is really important as well. So finally, employers must guarantee employees the right to return to their previous or equivalent position with no loss of benefits. So, and that's interesting, depending on the types of leave that an employer or the employee embarks upon. And the law provides a limited exception from this provision. And there were some vague interpretations of the law that have resulted in leave sometimes being approved, even when they are not legitimate. So loopholes exist, employers monitor, and employees adhere. So that whole mix of leave for medical purposes we'll examine that in a little more detail in this chapter. So, and there's a severance pay. Important to understand what severance pay is. It's a one-time payment when employees terminate, employers are terminated. Severance is considered a humanitarian gesture, if there's such a thing, and good public relations. Most managers expect employees to give them at least 2 weeks' notice when they're resigning or leaving their employment. And seems appropriate to provide at least 2 weeks severance if an employee is being dismissed as well, on the other side of that coin. A severance plan may be subject to various government regulations if the employer has a legal obligation, for example, to make severance payments, as is the case under some union contracts. Even voluntary plans become subject to Labor Act regulations if the employer identifies it as a plan established and maintained in the employee handbook, for example. So we'll look into the legal ramifications, how it's documented in handbooks, how employees know about them, and what the policies and procedures are in an organization that govern things like severance pay. We'll also talk in this chapter about employee engagement and an employee engagement guide for managers. And one of the cases we'll look at in this chapter is the one that talks about Costco, that famous wholesale distributor of goods, and the HR strategy to deflect Walmart's famously low costs of wages by paying employees more, and thereby producing improved employee engagement, productivity, and customer service. So as we go through those two cases and compare Costco to Walmart's scenarios, strategies, we'll look at Costco's employee benefits, which are also highly competitive in the industry, and particularly when compared with the typical sparse offerings of others in the retail industry. Costco doesn't directly measure employee engagement per se, but it does, or it says it tracks engagement as byproducts, as byproducts such as turnover and productivity. So companies use different metrics to measure outcomes, especially with compensation plans. Okay, so Costco, like other chains, and we'll go over this in a little more detail during this module, with traditional customer service at the heart of their operations. Organizations like Nordstrom and the Container Store, for example, also do well financially, in part by treating the employees well and keeping engagement up. So what it seems to be a very rote subject, compensation, turns out to be a real interesting and educational experience when we compare different companies and different plans. So we'll do that in this chapter. Okay, so this is the end of this brief lecture. We'll continue with module 6, week 6 lectures covering chapters 14 and 15 in the next video. So stay tuned and see you soon.